Yep, and a questioner here. Please go ahead, gentleman in the aisle.
A question about the nature of consciousness. Do the four panelists believe that advances in science in recent years have either shown that it is either very likely or very unlikely that consciousness can exist either as a separate consciousness or as an irreducible facet of humanity which is not reducible to materialism?
A question of infinite profundity about the nature of consciousness. And let's begin, I think, on this side, in fairness.
Well, we've had about 6 excellent questions, but criteria for truth, very briefly, the total human experience, not just what we might derive from science, but our experience of beauty, our experience of conscious, our experience of human relationships. All this we put together and wonder what the heck it's all about. So it's the total range of human experience.
Charles, well, what are you going to pick up on?
I just wanted to say that I'm interested by the way these questions have gone, because it illustrates the problem we have with the whole of this debate, which is it's always a serious question that's impossible to answer. And indeed, when the serious question is raised, the chairman says, oh, that's very difficult, and let's go on to another one. The trouble, and this is why I worry about the fundamentalist atheists, is because what it is using the method of scorn in order not to have the argument. It's always saying, here's the ridiculous example, here's the reductio ad absurdum, here is the bad behavior, instead of trying to actually to address and talk about these questions that keep coming from so many people in the hall tonight and so many people all over the world who actually want to think about the answers.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't, in fact, think, Charles, I don't quite accept that, because I think you have had every chance to come back and answer at length. You haven't always chosen to do so. Are there any other of the questions that were asked in that batch that you'd like to come back on?
I'm not complaining personally. I haven't been persecuted. I fear that the whole discussion about these issues is constantly misrepresented by the form that it takes and by the type of argument that sometimes comes from the atheist fundamentalists.
Okay.
Richard. Just press. Earlier on, Richard made a wonderfully telling point, I thought, when he said he'd never heard from a pulpit the remark on the balance of probabilities. Well, I can honestly say, I think I've read nearly all your books, I've never read the statement on the balance of probabilities there might not be a God.
What about the bus campaign?
I'll eat my words if you can point that.
Well, I can.
They're so definite.
No, chapter 4 of The God Delusion is called Why There Almost Certainly Is No God.
Yes.
I have put forward a 7-point scale from 1 total certainty there is a God to 7 total certainty there is no God, and I place myself as a number 6.5.
Chapter 4, verse 2, do you want to come back on that?
Well, that's not quite the same as the balance of probability. It's almost certainly probable. It's not quite the same, the balance of probability.
Well, if by that you mean we should be saying 50%, I'm certainly not happy to go for 50%.
I think Can we just... You asked a very interesting earlier question about experience of atheism. I draw a distinction between intellectual atheism and experiential atheism. The kind of experience the poet Edwin Muir had once in a bus, when the human beings in front of him were suddenly stripped of any sense of being human. Now, I do think that is a totally devastating experience. You sometimes get it after a Samuel Beckett play. A wonderful playwright, but you suddenly feel human beings being stripped of anything to do with the spirit. Now, actually, I think many religious believers go through that kind of experience of atheism, where the world suddenly seems totally devoid and empty of God. And it might have been that experience of Jesus on the cross, when he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? I think that sense of experiential atheism is actually much more disturbing than intellectual atheism.
Chairman?
Of course you may. Responding.
It is Sunday. We've heard a sermon. That's great. The implication of what Richard has just said is that to be an atheist is to have a dreary, bleak experience where everybody's stripped of their humanity. I can assure him it is utterly not like that at all. In fact, human beings come so fully into focus, their concern, their interest, their needs. That's why so many of us on this side of the debate are so committed to questions of human rights, civil liberties, campaign for them, promote the idea of free-minded education for children and equality for everybody in this world. And we do it because we don't think that the responsibility for that lies anywhere other than in our own hands. Now I'd like to answer the questions, if I may. Don't think, just believe. Yes, that's one of the explanations for the persistence of religion. It reminds me of my favorite joke from Bertrand Russell, who said, most people would rather die than think, and most people do. That explains that one. I've got been a challenge to explain my criteria for truth. Truth is a very, very hard thing to find, except in local empirical circumstances. Much, much more significant than that is rationality. And the word rationality is a very interesting one. First part of it, ratio, is about proportioning evidence to the conclusions that you derive from them. It means being guided by your very best exploration of the evidence, your very best, most responsible reasonings, submitting things to public test and debate. Rationality is the key. To behave, to think, and to believe rationally on the basis of the evidence, that is the surest path towards truth. You have to remember what Voltaire said. I will defend with my life the person who is seeking the truth, but I will not be so keen on the person who claims to have it. Finally, there is one big difference between Richard Dawkins and myself on the question of the 6.5 and agnosticism. I am not one little bit agnostic about fairies or pixies or goblins and so on, for all the other supernatural agencies that might be invoked. Don't forget, by the way, that fairies were very, very widely believed in this country until pretty recently. And the Irish lady I talked about earlier was by no means alone in that respect. The reason why you couldn't find your shoelaces and so on was because the fairies had pinched them. And one reason why the Church of England, in its great benevolence, instituted primary school education in the 19th century, was to extirpate that kind of superstition about fairy kind of belief. Now, I'm not an agnostic about that, and for exactly the same kind of rational, I hope, reasons, I'm not agnostic about deities and gods and goddesses and the rest of it. And finally, consciousness, very briefly. If you want to investigate the relationship of consciousness to matter, and in particular the brain, just take a heavy, blunt instrument and bash yourself over the head and see which bits of thinking you can no longer do.
It's a terrible struggle here to balance reasoned comments from our very distinguished panelists and about 100 hands that are up at the moment, and I'm failing terribly all the time to try and get that balance. Let's take a question over here. A lady with a red hand up, or someone with a mic. Power is all. Got a mic, go. Yes.
Hello. More a question to the two gentlemen who argue for the motion. I got the feeling that you're a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more on the defensive in this argument. And I just wonder, maybe you feel that religion, mainstream religion, is losing the argument, and therefore you have to go a little bit more on the defensive, and perhaps religion as it is has lost its purpose at all in the way of explaining the world and the universe and binding society together. What do you feel about this?
And hold that, and we're going to take these in the sum-ups. Lady over there.
I'd just like to ask Richard Dawkins a straight question. He seemed to speak with some authority about what vicars are saying in their pulpits at churches. When were you last in a church?
And a questioner over here. Do we have someone with a microphone over here? Someone with a microphone, stand up. Go, anyone with a microphone. Off you go. Your moment has come.